Hi guys, let's talk about emergencies and working in hospice. Let's talk about how that affects you as a home health hospice nurse in an emergency situation. What does that look like? What does that look like for you? Are you working in home health hospice? Do you have an emergency plan in place? Have you ever had to enact that? And how does that look? I would love to talk about that more. I ask that you, if you like what you see here, then you like, subscribe, and follow for more. Share. And always feel free to reach out to me in the comments. I read my comments, I do answer back, and I look forward to hearing from anybody on feedback. The good, the bad, the ugly. As always, anything that I say here is strictly my opinion. Take what resonates with you and leave what doesn't, like the psychics say. So, we always hear about emergencies in healthcare. When I lived in the Midwest, for example, we had tornado precautions. My main background is in long-term care for many, many years. So living in the Midwest, we had, of course, fire drills in our facility. And believe it or not, I have been part of a fire in a facility that was set off by a resident having teddy bears on their light in their room in a long-term care facility. And that was fun. I did do the race method with the fire extinguisher and put the fire out, but it still set off the fire alarm and sent the firefighters, which we all appreciate in nursing. But the other thing that we had to prepare for in long-term care is tornadoes. And in a nursing home, that looks something like making sure that all the residents' curtains are closed. If they're bedbound, making sure to pull the curtain around them, shutting the doors. If they're not bedbound, putting them in the hallway with blankets, pillows. We used to have to tape a mattress to the glass on the door. Made sure that we have flashlights. We had a generator, so we had to make sure to plug oxygens into the red plugs. I got really good at knowing how to handle a tornado situation in my long-term care facility because it was something that we had warnings about and that we actually had to check on. When I moved to Texas, the things that became frightening for me is the idea of a hurricane, because I lived in the Houston area for a short time, and one of the things that we had to prepare for was a hurricane, and that's not something I've ever lived through in the Midwest. Don't get me wrong, we've had straight line winds, tornadoes, floods, all of the things. And also, they always prepare you for an earthquake in the Midwest. Believe it or not, where I come from in the Midwest is on a fault line, and they're always waiting for the big one. But in Texas, where I started working when I came to the Texas area, we did have to prepare for hurricanes, and I was terrified of that concept. And again, that was in a long-term care situation. When I transitioned over into hospice, we have protocols for emergencies as well. Every patient has an emergency code in their chart that tells us what their acuity level is, how we would respond to an emergency situation for them. So some people maybe live alone, maybe they don't have a generator, maybe they are in a rural area. Those people are high acuity, those people are high need in an emergency to make sure that they're okay, to make sure that we have a way to check on them. People that are in a skilled nursing facility or a hospital setting, for example, they have more equipment and things available to them to put them at a lower need sometimes. I know disasters can hit facilities, and the main thing is when you're thinking about emergencies in a home care setting, you want to be talking to your patients about where would they evacuate to if an emergency happened. I know that floods have happened in the area where I'm in, and we did have to enact our emergency response. We did have to call all of our patients daily, make sure that each of them was okay, make sure that we had contact with them. We had to, and it's like 24/7, we have to make sure that our patients are okay at any time of the day when we have a situation arise like this. And then again, we had a situation with a shooting in an area, and again, we had to check on our staff and our patients. So anytime there's an emergency, your company has a plan for how that looks. And it's good if you talk through that plan and your patients are prepared for what that could look like, especially if you live in an area where floods or tornadoes might happen. Or ice, for example. Where I live, believe it or not, has the potential for ice. And when ice gets on power lines, it can turn the power off because ice gets heavy on the power line and the power goes out. Now, I'm from the Midwest again, so I'm used to ice storms in the Midwest, but I can assure you that warmer climates like Texas are not as equipped for ice as places like, Illinois and Wisconsin. Just gonna put that out there from experience. So people don't always know what to do in an ice situation, in a flood situation, in a tornado situation. And I think it's really important that you have those conversations with your families, your patients, and of course, that you're reviewing those things with the staff that you work with your management team, because it's really important to know what the expectation is for you as a worker and what the expectation your patient should have of you as a worker, as their caregiver, as their team. And it's a little bit chaotic sometimes if things aren't discussed ahead of time, what that would look like if we have these conditions. If A, B, and C happens, then we do this. If this happens, then we do this. There should be a clear understanding of what those steps are going to look like. When we do admissions in a home setting, we should be asking, and I know I do, when I do an admission for a patient, I say, where would you evacuate to if you had an emergency? People will look at you like you grew a third eye or a second head. You know, they look at you like, what are you talking about if I had an emergency? Because you know what? We don't think that things are going to happen to us when we're just living our lives going day by day. We don't imagine that an emergency or something terrible will happen. We don't think of calamity every day until it's presented to us or it's in our face or it's happened. So it is really important, and I say to my patients, what would you do if you had an emergency situation and you had to evacuate? And patients will say, what do you mean? I say, say you had a flood or a tornado, where would you go? If you didn't have electricity, or the power was out for many days, or your house was flooded, where would you go? And that is the kind of questions that you can't just say, where would you evacuate to in an emergency? Because honestly, people look at me like, what are you talking about every time I ask that question? So a better question to ask, I suppose, would be, where would you go if your electricity was out, or if you had a flood or a tornado came? Or where would you go if your house was cold in the winter and your heat went out? When our patients' heat goes out, or they don't have electricity or running water, those situations become part of our care plan. Those situations become part of our care of our patient in a home setting. Much like a facility where you care what's happening to your patient's well-being, in a home care, in a hospice setting where we're caring for people that live in the community, it's just as important for us to have a plan for those emergencies. And I thought that that would be something interesting to talk about, since we're in that time of year where we get tornadoes and floods. I mean, calamities happen all the time. In the winter, we get snow, we get ice, we get things that we might expect could happen, but it doesn't always affect us, right? Sometimes the ice storm comes and nobody loses power. But I remember the first year that I came to Texas was just after they had had a severe winter for the first time in many years, and many of them had damage to their homes, were without power for long amounts of time, and they were not prepared for that situation. So it is really important to think, what would I do if this did happen? And how can I prepare my patients and my families for this as well? Something to think about, something to talk about. And I wonder, have you ever been in an emergency situation where you had to check on your patients? I know here in the area where I am, we had severe flooding to where roads were washed away. And, you know, luckily none of our patients were affected by the flooding, aside from delayed, drive time because we weren't able to get to them, because we had to find alternate routes for a while. I'm just telling you, I was really impressed with how fast they fixed the road. It added an extra 30 minutes to my already hour commute to the job that I was doing, and it was a lot. So I was really impressed with the Department of Transportation getting that road fixed so quickly, and very appreciative, very, very appreciative. But I will tell you that the first thing that happened is the leadership reached out to management, to staff. We all reached out to our teams, to our patients, and we made calls. And we made sure that all of our patients were safe, sound, and had electricity, had running water, and were not without, the things that they needed to keep them comfortable. Because in hospice, our focus is on comfort. And if you don't have electricity and you don't have heat and you don't have running water, or say it happens in the summer and you don't have air conditioning, my goodness, Texas is hot in the summer. And I tell you what, I lived in Las Vegas too, and that would be a disaster if we didn't have air conditioning. An absolute disaster. I cannot imagine living in Las Vegas without air conditioning. And I think that that would be an emergency. I suppose there are people who do live without air conditioning. And when I was a child, I lived without air, but I just couldn't imagine living in a climate that got in the 130s and then up in the hundreds in the summer without some way to keep cool. So again, it's really important based on the area that you live in, what kind of calamity you might face and how that looks for your team and for your patients. And it's really important that you're aware of those things because they can also affect you and your family in addition to your patients. So I think it's just a really good thing to be prepared for. Make sure that we're always having that communication about extra supplies, batteries, flashlights, water supplies in case someone has to go without water. Making sure that we have a way to meet those needs for our patients if they can't afford those things financially, and finding the right people to bring in those situations, because there are resources out there and it is our job to find those resources. Have you ever experienced an emergency? What kind of emergency did you experience? How did you guys handle it? Were there any injuries or fatalities as a result of those emergencies? How did that make you feel inside, emotionally? I would love to talk about those things in the comments and hear more. I love reading you guys' comments. I do read them all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I do respond as quickly as possible. And I really appreciate those of you that watch me and take the time to comment. And I thank you for taking time to get through these videos. So that's all I have about emergencies. But if you have any interesting ideas or subjects that you would like to talk about, please leave me a suggestion in there. I know there was a suggestion about wound care. I didn't forget that. But let's talk some more. I love to see the suggestions and the comments that I get. I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.